Hi, I'm Justin Mormon.
And I'm Katie Thornton, and this is the Re-Education of Schools podcast,
where we have open, honest conversations about how to better understand social-emotional learning, trauma-informed care, the whys behind student behavior, and how to help kids navigate it all as they go through school and life. All right, welcome back to our next episode, Restorative Practices. Hey, before we get started on this topic, just want to remind you, we would love it if you would give us a review and share all of this with somebody that you know, friends, enemies, frenemies, whatever it might be. Whatever the review is, that's fine too. We obviously would super appreciate some 5-star reviews. All of it just helps keep the conversation going and helps people find our podcast so we can continue the conversation. So, restorative practices.
Yep.
So it's something that's talked about quite a bit, right? I mean, You're hearing it a decent amount if you're working in schools. And I think what our goal here today is to help people not just understand what restorative practices are, but also to kind of understand what that might look like at different levels throughout a school building, right?
Yeah, I think.
Did I get it right? Am I right on what we're doing here over the next 30 minutes? Okay, that's good.
Here we are.
Right.
I just think restorative practices is like one of the essential pillars for trauma-informed work. So if you're a trauma-informed schools, you are doing restorative practices. You can't coexist with one without the other.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, so let's dive into what this is. What are restorative practices in an educational setting?
Well, I was going to write down my own words.
Yeah.
But I didn't today. So okay. I'm going to share something else with you.
So they could really find all this information without listening to the...
Yeah, but I'm going to...
it's better this way.
Yeah, it's better this way. I'm going to contextualize it.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I found this really good article, which we'll share online, but it's from Education Weekly article, and it's by somebody called Larry Filazzo. I'm hoping I pronounced his last name right.
Okay.
But I thought... To summarize, as I was researching a lot of different articles preparing for today, I thought his words about restorative practices were so good that I thought I'm not even trying to paraphrase this or put in my own thoughts. I want to give him credit for what he had said. So,
all right, let's hear it.
Okay, from our friend Larry, shout out to him. Our responsibility as educators is to help our young scholars develop the skills they will need to be effective citizens and contributors to their communities, and that goes beyond academics. We have a moral obligation to mentor and shape them to be able to be distinguished from right and wrong and to analyze the choices they have in order to make morally sound decisions. Therefore, when we only impose punitive or retribution measures in response to any poor decision they may have made without looking closely at the underlying cause of their behavioral outbursts, we are essentially depriving them of the opportunity to comprehend their poor decision making and how those decisions affect them, their peers, and their community.
I wish that you would have pretended like those were your own words and that you were just saying them off the top of your head.
It was good, right?
No, it is good. Yeah.
That's essentially why restorative practices works. It's essentially walking through. It's really what we talk about being good parenting, right? We're here to teach our kids. It's with boundaries, but we're teaching kids how to communicate, how to take accountability for their actions, and how to be able to re-enter repair. We've been in really bad practices in education. You do something, we remove you. You go back into the environment. We just never talk about it again. We sweep everything under the rug. And then as we know, tensions build up, and we're not teaching kids actually how to be critical thinkers, problem solvers, accountability, responsibility. And actually, this part of restorative practices is some of the best ways that we get behavioral shifts from kids.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and I think all of us, in all likelihood, growing up, we didn't have anybody teaching us how to go through these processes anyway, or at least the vast majority of us, and almost certainly none of us in schools. And so I think that what that's led to, we've talked about this before, it's led to a bunch of adults that don't know how to handle it. Kind of look around, right? Just look around. It's not hard to see that a lot of adults don't know how to interact with each other if there is some kind of conflict or there's some kind of harm that's been done or anything like that. So it's super important for us to be able to jump in now in kids' lives, kind of whatever their age, and be able to start teaching them how to have restorative conversations and follow some of these restorative practices.
Yeah, and I want to preface this before we kind of go into the rest of the episode, is that this can only happen with emotionally safe relationships and safe community and context.
Yeah.
That and we'll kind of explain more as we go through, but that when we talk about schools have to be safe or sense of safety, it's really, if you ever try to apologize or you're hesitant to apologize to somebody, it's probably because it didn't feel safe to do that.
Yeah. When we talk about safety, it's less about, I mean, I think
Physical
we can,
safety.
which is part of it, obviously. But
Yeah.
I think that we sometimes stop there. And that's where people get offended a little bit. We'll probably talk about that a little bit more in a future episode, actually. And so I think that that's important to know too, though. It's beyond just like the physical safety. So I don't have words that are as eloquent as Larry. I mean, who does? But what I said was that restorative practices really is just the approaches that schools use to build healthy relationships, handle conflict, and respond to harm in ways that focus on learning and accountability rather than punishment. Almost certainly I didn't come up with those words just by myself too. So I just want to say that. But it wasn't Larry. We're not just pulling everything from Larry.
Yeah.
I want that to be known. So really, like, to break that down, think of it as a shift from like who broke the rule and what's the consequence to who is affected, what do they need, and how do we make things right.
Yeah.
Kind of like it's that kind of shift. So, all right. So let's look at let's do it this way. Let's look at restorative practices at the different tier levels of
MTSS.
MTSS. Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's start with tier 1.
Okay, tier 1, this is where we're looking at community meetings or circles. So at our school, we start every morning with some type of soft start, and then there's opportunities for community meeting, whether this is implementing your SEL curriculum or your class circling up and talking about their weekend, just that for however that looks like for you. It's the opportunity for your class to have dialogue and be responsive either with personal things going on in their lives, or it will end up being a tool that you're going to use when there's conflict in your classroom, right?
Okay, what about, not to throw you off right away, what about middle school and high school? So they have kind of different setups. What are your thoughts in
They
those?
have advisories.
Yes.
First thing,
Absolutely.
So middle school, high school, you have advisories. Restorative practices should be the foundation in those groups. That is your home base of your like family, your safe community. That's what the intent of those forms are set up. Now, I don't know if that's always how they're carried out, but there's opportunity for that to be what the forum is moving forward for our kids.
Yeah, and thinking about both, I've got a middle schooler and a high schooler right now. So the high schooler, she's going to be in the same advisory kind of homeroom for all 4 years. She's a freshman right now. She'll be with that same group of students, same teacher, assuming nobody like leaves or whatever. She'll be with that same group for 4 years and have that opportunity to kind of build in hopefully relationships with somebody that maybe with people that she won't see otherwise. Maybe she would never normally have that teacher as a class. And so it just gives another opportunity for a place that is, to your point, safe. And also, I mean, that's what they do in there. She'll come home frequently and she'll be like, we were talking about this. And I was like, what class was that? And she's like, well, it was advisory. I'm like, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And then same thing for middle school, you know, you're going to have some kind of advisory and then I think even taking it one step further, and we've talked about this a little bit at different times, the value of being able to take even the first couple of minutes of a class period, if you're in middle school or high school, to check in, talk about current events, talk about like this thing that's, applicable right now and what that means and how we think about it and things like that. I mean, I think you can do that in just about every class. I know you're time crunched in those periods. It's like moving along, but I think that's an important thing to keep in mind for educators.
Yeah. So the other things we're going to see about in restorative practice tier 1 level is classroom rules, expectations, promises, norms. Those things should be created with the class. So you shouldn't be the teacher and say, hey, I'm Mr. Mormon, and these are the 3 things you can or can't do in here, and just move on. These should be things that the kids buy into at any age or level, that you're collectively buying into some type of classroom rules and norms that fits your setting. We're going to see goal setting, so kids to always striving to be better people each day. So we're going to put goal settings in there. Active listening, which is a really critical skill that we're going to teach. Not only we're going to participate in as an educator, but our kids are learning that skill. We're going to be modeling what restorative practices looks like in the classroom so that we're being good examples, and we're going to be supporting that process at the tier 1 level. Lots and lots of conversations. We are constantly teaching and making sure that kids understand what and why behavioral decisions and the impacts they have. There's accountability to others and their self. for any of the behavior that's going on. So the accountability piece is huge in restorative practices. It does exist when we talk about kids need to be own it. And that sometimes I have kids who will say, can you please just suspend me? I'd rather just be out of school than have to go apologize to my class. And I'm like, no, man, we have to be able to come back to school tomorrow. Yeah. We can't, that's not going to help you. It's a lot of coaching through. A lot of kids would rather avoid addressing the conflict than having to go address it. So just know that is the ultimate accountability. And the belief that every person is equally valued and important to the functioning of this classroom, that everyone has to be there for our group to function, and that it's not that you don't belong here.
Yeah.
That's all at the tier 1 setting. And I would say example of this is classroom. So kids are classroom roasting each other a lot, especially in the upper grades. We're seeing this a lot in 5th grade. They're roasting each other. And so we just had to have like a tier 1 meeting as a whole grade level community to talk about, review our classroom norms and expectations, how the impacts on each other, the impacts on the staff, how it's disrupted the school community, essentially a big restorative practice tier 1 meeting on that. So that's what, when we talk about tier 1 at restorative practice level, that's a great example of how that can play out.
And that's our next staff meeting as well, right? We're going to all roast each other at our next.
Yeah. Okay. I would love to see what you'll come up with.
We're better off not. Yeah. We're better off not doing that. Yeah. So this tier 1, and again, I think most people out there listening probably know this, but this tier 1, this is like everybody baseline, everybody's getting all of these things. That's why so many of these thoughts and strategies, approaches have to do with whole classes, whole grades, it's kind of that baseline level of what everybody's getting. Okay, so then let's kick it up a notch to tier 2.
All right, so we're no longer looking at the whole class anymore, right? These are some either a group of kids or individual kids that are having a conflict. And so things we're looking at is the repair conversation, and I'll kind of explain this when I get down to the example. Mm-hmm. Parent communication's happening. I do parent communication. I sent like a tier 1 parent communication to all of our 5th grade families this week about what I talked to them about, just because they're great partners with us. So I would do the parent communication at the tier 1 level as well, but it has to happen at the tier 2 level. Okay, so you're going to basically get parents involved. You're probably logging an incident in some kind of school database system that you are now at a tier 2 level of intervention. You're anchoring it back to your school belief systems and why this is affecting your school community, because it's outside of our beliefs or our norms about our school. Your functioning restorative practice school, this is really automatic. And it's led offender and victim after being prepped with one another. So this is how it could look. Kids saying, as kids do, some crazy threat kind of thing out of being frustrated or angry with each other. Obviously, we don't think those threats are viable, but they said something not nice to each other, right?
Sure.
So let's pretend like Justin and Josh are my students. Mm-hmm. And so I am going to talk to Josh privately about the incident. I'm going to listen, active listening to what actually happened based upon his feedback and the story that he has to tell there. And I'm going to acknowledge his feelings. We're going to talk about his ownership in it. And we're going to talk about what he needs to repair from his part in participating in this. I'm also going to have the same conversation with Justin. And I'm
still separately,
and I'm going to document both accounts and sides, right? And then after I'm done talking with each one of them, I'm going to make sure each one of them feel comfortable and ready to repair with each other. And then we're going to talk through what that can look like. Then I'm going to get both of them together, and our kids are so great. It's just like automatic. I have to put very little effort. They just kind of know how to do this now, which has been really cool to see. So I don't really have to prep or facilitate too much. Usually it's a big hug and I love you, man. I'm so sorry. But sometimes you have to facilitate, like, hey, Justin, do you want to share kind of from your perspective what was going on, and how do you, and it's not accusatory, so I'm not getting them when they're dysregulated, right? But share your side of the story. What do you think your ownership is? What do you think you need to do to repair with Josh? Josh is going to do the same. And I would say 10 out of 10 times the kids walk back and they're fine in class. I usually never have any issues. I never have any issues with that. So you look at your kids that are ready to participate in that. And usually if we're at a tier 2 level, that has been very successful. And then communicate back out with the teachers, and then document and log to the parents. And then we're going through that process and say, hey guys, next time this happens, I want you to understand that I'm going to have to approach this differently, and this is still going to happen, but we might need to add another layer of teachable moments or consequences to that.
Some kind of consequence.
Yeah.
So I think it's important too to say we're obviously going over things that we do a decent amount of, with some kind of frequency. We've also both been formally trained in restorative practices.
Yes.
So I think that one of the things, like, you might be out there listening and saying like, oh man, that could be nice. I don't really even know like what to say in these kind of conversations. I don't know, how to even get that started, or it seems like it'll be awkward, or during our training, they gave us different ways, different questions to ask, different scripts to kind of follow. You kind of go through it a couple times, and you start learning over the years of doing it for quite a while. You start learning you don't need a script in front of you, or you don't need the questions in front of you. You kind of just are doing them naturally. But if you're feeling uncomfortable with the idea, which again, going back to what I said a little earlier, a lot of us are at first because we never did this ourselves growing up. So then we're like, oh, this is really hard or awkward to do. I would encourage you to find some kind of actual restorative practices training to go through, learn from, things like that. I think that's an important step. And then also, maybe not everybody in your school can go through this kind of training. In that case, like, we've both and had others as well go through the training, but then there have been plenty of times that I've sat with another teacher and just kind of facilitated the conversation, and then watched then later how that same teacher, thinking of one guy in particular that doesn't work with us anymore, but and then watched later when I was like, hey, do you want me to sit with you? And he's like, no, I got it. I know how to do it. And like, so sometimes people just need somebody to kind of go through it with them once or twice. Yeah.
And we have some recommendations that we'll share later too, that will be part of it, and how you can kind of get this launched off. And I think you made a good point, is that as much as I'm saying as the school principal, all of our teachers at this point feel very comfortable doing this. And so I sometimes get involved in tier 2 things just because scheduling and timing, we're supporting each other. But a lot of times they just kind of take care of it, and we can kind of share how we've set up schedules for them to have time to do that, because that's when, you trust and have a relationship with adults that spend time with you. And it's that whole thing we said, if I do it all the time, then I'm the ultimate authority, when really the classroom teacher needs to hold that power.
And what you find is a lot of times people just need the confidence, a little bit of confidence boost. There's recently a situation when you weren't around, and when somebody came and was like, what do you think I do in this? And it could have been easy for me to be like, I'll just do this. Who do I need to talk to, and whatever else. But instead I was like, well, here's what we're going to do. We're going to do it like this and this and this. And just went through the things that we always do. And they're like, okay, I just want to make sure. Like, a lot of times people just need, once they kind of get it, they're still like, well, is this right? And you're like, yeah, it is. Like, yeah, go for it. Like, that's exactly the right. And then if you're trying to go through this process and something else crazy comes up, like, definitely let me know. You've got people to back you up. But I think sometimes people just need the confidence to keep going with it.
Absolutely.
All right. Is that all you have for the tier 2? Did I cut you off? Okay. Tier 3. Where are we at now?
This is a more formal repair, often facilitated by a trained person. Like, this is somebody that probably really needs to have formal restorative practice training, and we'll kind of talk about what that means. In following a more formal script, it looks like many layers and often follows more intensive, unsafe behavioral needs. So this is a pretty big crisis situation if we're in a tier 3. I have been a facilitator at another school for a big crisis that they needed like a third party person to come in and repair. So example is that harm has been caused to a staff member after a big event, and that was witnessed by the class. Okay. So, and the staff member isn't ready to receive, there's a lot of hostility and feelings. As we know, as educators, you're going to relate to this. Not really sure about if I'm ready to receive that kid back in my class. What does this look like? Do they even care? Are they even sorry that this even happened? And so sometimes you need a more formal restorative script to kind of go through the process, and there's going to be a lot of prep work. This isn't going to be like the day of repair or the 2 days. This is probably like we're coming off a suspension. And that we're going to set this up before you can even actually come back to school. And there's going to be a lot of groundwork that's going to be set up for this.
And this is, so again, not to interrupt you, but I think this is super important, because historically what could happen is we assume that just the consequence, if you want to say the punishment, a kid is maybe suspended for something that's big. Not that we're certainly not downplaying what maybe a situation that might have happened if it's led to suspension. And then what we assume historically, in the past was the suspension took care of it. Now the student's going to come back. But what's always been true is that student doesn't know what anyone else thinks.
Yep.
So now they're coming back cautious,
Anxious,
worried, probably still a little bit like, where do I stand? The teacher certainly is like, what am I getting back? The last experience I had with this student was clearly awful. Like, it was not good. It was like an intense moment, even if it wasn't directly directed at the teacher. But they're worried about it. So you got the kids worried, you got the teacher worried, the rest of the class probably worried.
Yeah.
Everybody's worried and anxious. And what we used to do is just pretend like the suspension took care of it, or like the consequence itself took care of it. And what restorative practice approach would say or would do is actually, that's not it. That's actually we're going to acknowledge the fact that everybody's anxious and nervous. Let's talk about that fact. And then let's all sit down together and we're going to figure it out, and to make sure that everybody feels like they're in a good spot coming back in. Yeah. And so I think it's just really, really important at this level. It's important at every level, but like at this level, it starts getting to be pretty significantly important that we have people that can walk us through this.
And it's chronically the most misstep, and then we end up having another big situation pretty quickly and a lot of feelings, and we end up over disciplining kids because we never closed the loop on the first situation. Yeah. And then this is where we see, especially kids with chronic behavior issues, we see it get kind of big pretty fast. On the kids' end and the adults' end. And then we kind of have this, you talk about Dr. Lori kind of redid Nicholas Long's conflict cycle, right? The adult and child. And we're just constantly in this like burnout of a loop until we get to this place of like respect and co-regulation with each other where we can coexist. Yeah. When that doesn't happen, and it can't happen without restorative practices. Yeah. And it's a little bit of a in these kind of situations, it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Like we're saying like, oh, like this kid was, then we start labeling kids, right? Ourselves. And kids start labeling teacher. Everybody's just labeling everybody, right? Like, that teacher's the worst. They hate me. They're whatever names that we want to fill in there. Yeah. The teacher's like, this kid's just a bad kid. Their parents are this way. Their family. It's probably because of all of these reasons. We start like doing that, and we start losing the humanity both ways, right? And that's really like we've lost the empathetic part of it. So now the teacher maybe isn't feeling terribly empathetic because they're worried, they're stressed, they're starting to take the humanity out of it. The kid isn't learning how to be empathetic because nobody's teaching, which is what restorative practices ultimately does. It helps us to be able to see stuff from other people's perspective in a safe way, and then be able to understand, hopefully, how to move forward with the situation. And so then everybody's just anxious. Everybody's worried. We come in. Teacher maybe says something that, because they're like, I don't want this to happen again. I feel like it's going to. So I'm going to get ahead of it by being, in all likelihood, kind of super controlling about the situation, even more than what I normally would with a normal student. That student then is like, I feel like this teacher's targeting me, and look at this, they are. Like now they're actually doing something, because this other kid did the exact same thing I just did. And she didn't say anything to him. And so they are targeting me, and so everybody starts believing stuff that they've assumed because of a tough situation. And this just super important approach to be able to help get ahead of so much of that and help everybody see everybody else as an actual person. Yeah, this cannot happen without empathy. And we take empathy away, then this is
we're just punitive. Yeah,
yep.
We're just punitive every time. Yep. All right, sorry, jumped in there.
Yeah,
Keep
you're
going.
good. No, that was my spiel for 2 or 3.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
You're good.
All right. So we've got all these different tier levels that we've talked about, right? So how does restorative practices actually impact school culture and climate?
I think it changes everything. This is like the shift in behavioral discipline. Yeah. To be trauma informed, you have to have restorative practice trained staff. I think we're going to get ready to talk here in a minute about things that you actually got, action items that you're going to hear us say to go and actually do in your school to get this up and running. But our approach is we're going to be with kids, and we come from a place of empathy all the time. And when you do that, then your belief systems about kids change in your school, and that's the shift.
Yeah. So 2 things. I think in the long term, I absolutely agree with you. I think the culture and climate will improve overall. All the teachers and staff actually will end up feeling more comfortable and confident. in their ability to manage any kind of tough behavioral situation. I think if you're doing it well at a tier 1 level, and even really a tier 2 level, I think you're only going to have, I mean, you're always going to have behavior. You're working with a classroom full of any group of kids, whatever age, right? Like, yeah, you're always going to have stuff's going to come up, but I think you're going to have way less behavioral situations that feel big that you have to go through. But I do think that the staff becomes way less panicky about any kind of behavior that pops up. And then I think since teachers aren't relying on the administrator as much for nearly as many discipline issues, which we've seen in our building, like that's been I'll say this first. Like I think the office area will end up feeling less chaotic too. And that leads to just a greater overall feeling of calm within the building. So like if you have kids walking the halls, or you've got teachers popping in and out of the office, and there's always 2 to 3 kids sitting in a group of chairs waiting to go see the admin because they're in trouble, that gives you a general feel of like, oh man, some people are constantly having problems. People are constantly in trouble. Things are constantly needing this major authority at a high level to be involved. I think it never stops surprising me how many people are surprised that we don't have a line outside your door waiting to come see you for behavior stuff. Again, and you referenced it, certainly there are times that you are involved with behavioral 100%. Situations, like some big stuff comes up, people need an administrator. We get that, and that's true. And Katie does a good job of being there in those situations, I think. But overall, I think not having that line, quote unquote, line out the door of kids waiting to see a principal, that actually starts affecting, kind of relate it to like the whole broken window theory, right? Like if you constantly are seeing a broken window, broken down, kind of run down houses, then the assumption in a neighborhood starts being like, oh, nobody really cares about this neighborhood. And so why should I care about this neighborhood that much? It's actually the smaller things like that end up leading to bigger and bigger things, as crazy as it sounds. So it's the same idea. If we're constantly seeing, oh, there are people outside the principal's office, it just leads to a feel that potentially there's a lot going on and the teachers don't really want to or have the capability of handling it. And so when a big thing comes up for me as a teacher, is this a thing I should handle? Because it seems like a lot of teachers have our principal handle it. So maybe I should have the principal get involved to make sure it's happening the right way. It kind of perpetuates it, even though you wouldn't think it would. So I just think that that's important to bring up.
And the other last point I'll have about that is just to saying that you as the school administrator have to empower people to be able to do that. So I have to be okay and make sure they feel like they have the authority and the confidence and my support to handle behavioral situations, and how I do them are sometimes different than how other people do with them. I mean, we're under the same principles, right?
Yes.
But ultimately my job is to support the teachers, to help kids, make sure we're anchoring back to our belief systems all the time, and they are empowered to make those decisions. They don't need to run things by me all the time to handle or take care of stuff, because we're all operating the same belief system consistently on the same page.
Yeah, I think that's something I've experienced at a different level, different roles I've had at different times. I've experienced it, but I think even, you start thinking about, from my perspective, intervention specialist, and I'm working with different paraprofessionals and things like that. There are plenty of times that, any of the paraprofessionals I've worked with over the years maybe will handle something different, as far as like the details of it than what I would. But we're all different people, and that doesn't make somebody else wrong, as long as we're all having the same overall, to your point, overall like beliefs and mindsets about what our goals are and how we're going to accomplish them. I have to be able to let people, and from your perspective, you definitely do. There's just too many kids. There's too many people, and we're at a relatively small school. It has to be able to run through individuals. You can't micromanage it all. It can't all run through you. Or if it is, you're going to burn out. Everybody's going to burn out, and it's not going to go well, because everybody's going to feel like they're not doing a good enough job, or that they're not trusted. All the things. The other thing I was going to say about how it can affect culture and climate, I mean, I think, again, important thing to hear long term, and I'm not even saying like years from now, but like long term at all, like even months down the road, whatever, I think it's going to be a positive thing. I do think in the short term, it's important to acknowledge, as things are getting figured out and people are being trained, and starting to like get into this process, it does have the potential to make things harder from a staff perspective. So if we're currently leaning on a more punitive model, which is typically where schools have fallen over the years, when we enforce consequences without empathy and all of that, then a shift to restorative practices like cold turkey
Yeah.
is going to feel real jarring.
Yep.
And it's going to lead to a lot of big feelings because nobody feels competent in it yet. And so just be aware of how it's being rolled out. It's tough if you show up, these air on Mondays, right? If you show up on Tuesday tomorrow, if you're listening to this on a Monday and you're like, guess what? Now we're going to do restorative practices here. Stop doing all the other stuff we've been doing. You're asking for a mess. Don't do it that way. So just be aware, like short term, it can be a little dicey to
100%.
get because it's change and people struggle with change a little bit. Yeah.
Anytime.
All right. So what are some of the essential steps for a school to take to launch this work? Not just doing it cold turkey.
Okay. Yes. So you're going to want to get as many people as you can formally trained. This is through the IIRP, International Institute for Restorative Practices. You'll just have to look and see if you have trainers or send somebody from your district or building to be a trainer formally and kind of go through that formal process. You don't have to have everybody formally trained, but it is good to at least have a handful of people. And I think the more people you get, the better, right?
Yeah, can't hurt.
Yeah. So you're going to find people in your building that feel really confident or passionate about this work and empower them to be leaders. That distributed leadership model, find people that are good with that. Provide continuous professional development. This is the part that's embodied in our work. It's part of our belief statements. We are constantly bringing it up, coaching, giving in different formats. So you're going to share it at a staff meeting. You're going to talk about it in your SELT meeting. You're going to have it in your PLC group so people can have some raw, honest conversations. You're going to go back and coach at a tier 1 meeting to kind of see what people are thinking in terms of how they're approaching things. You're going to provide one-on-one coaching and mentoring through a situation and experience. So all those things need to be present when you're putting on a new initiative. You need to be facilitating all those things as a building administrator in all those forums.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's what I mean by professional development. You need to give safe place to practice, discuss, problem solve, and disagree with this process.
Yeah.
So we talk about that all the time too. It can't be everyone that's on the team in favor of this making all the decisions because you're going to leave a lot of people behind and that's going to cause disgruntled culture and climate. So you need to set, whether it's a team that is working specifically on aligning restorative practices in your MTSS process for school discipline reform, or it's your staff evaluating that process every year to make sure that we are reviewing it and talking about it and anchoring back to that practice. You need to be able to have a variety of people to do that and be okay with them asking questions and disagreeing. Explain accountability. So you need to talk about how we're holding kids accountable and what that looks like. Documentation needs to happen, that you still need to document behavior, that this isn't like a free pass. We talked about it and there's no record. It is still part of a disciplinary track record here. Communication with parents, district administrators, and community. Communication is clarity of what you're doing, is that you don't, I think the more we can explain to people what the research and the outcomes are, the better. And then support the integration of this model and coach other as they begin to do this to make them feel more comfortable. We talked about that a little bit earlier.
Yeah. Yeah, I think at the really young levels, really early childhood, kind of even up through maybe even second, third grade, I think teachers in that realm do this naturally a little bit better. Mm-hmm. There's a lot more like teaching little kids how to do stuff. I think even at the later elementary level, it becomes a little bit less just naturally happening. And so I think that's important to kind of be aware about that. I think at the high school level and the middle school level, I think this is just also that was popping into my mind while you were talking. I think at both of those levels, we can assume that kids are going to think it's dumb, or they're going to be like, I'm not about this. Well, really what it is, like at that level, even like everybody's still learning how to do it, like student wise. So I think it's important to lean into that a little bit and not just be like, oh, these students are going to be like, this is so dumb. Maybe they will, but I think any person is looking to have somebody help them resolve conflict and to feel better. They just are. So keep that in mind. As far as some of the essential steps, like we asked, I think you hit really a ton of them that I had written down. Also, I think the training, right? Some basic training in neuroscience, like all those kind of things, neuroscience and trauma and all of that needs to be there. I think that's becoming more and more prevalent in schools across the board. But I think doing it in a way that is good. I don't know. That's a terrible way to say it, but like not doing it in like a really dry, this isn't applicable kind of way, I think is important. The only other thing I would say is is putting in place structures and plans for people to have time to do this. I think that's important. I think it's something that we've worked hard at our building. It's one thing to be like, hey, teachers should be able to own having a restorative conversation between two students at a tier 2 level. It's another thing then when that teacher's like, when?
Yeah.
When am I supposed to do that? Because I only have 30 minutes to eat lunch and maybe a planning period. And then I'm with kids 100% of the time outside of that. So I'm supposed to like maybe not eat my lunch, or I'm supposed to give up my planning period. And there are probably plenty of teachers out there that would do either of those things, you know, because they want to do the thing. But I think the more you can create actual plans and structure around like, the principal will come cover the class, or a counselor can come cover the class for 25, 30 minutes to help the teachers be the ones that have the time to be able to own and practice some of these approaches. I think that's super important because, again, those teachers are the ones that are actually with the kids all the time. We say this a lot, but they're the ones that are actually with the kids. It's easy for a counselor to come in and swoop in and pop in, right? Be one of those pop-in people that comes in and takes a kid and takes the two kids and goes and does the restorative conversation. But then the teacher's never, one, getting better at that. And the kids are never expecting that the teacher's the one that's going to handle those things. Or the principal, or the, IS, or whoever it is. So just keep in mind that it's one thing to say a lot of this stuff needs to happen. It's also important as you're starting to get into this process, have that same team, have some people, Enneagram episode not long ago, have some of those sixes, Enneagram sixes who are good at being like, what are all the problems that could exist? Have some of those people on that team that are really good at identifying the problems, being like, hey, like when are we going to be able to do this? Or how is this going to work? Or what about this part of it? Listen to those people. They're good at coming up with, it can feel annoying if you're trying to get something going sometimes, but really those people are good at coming up with the problems that could exist.
Absolutely.
So figure some of that stuff out. I think that's important as well. All right. Well, what do you want people to walk away with knowing from this episode?
All right. I think mine's pretty simple, that the pillar of trauma-informed schools, and if you are wanting to start this work, you have to learn it through the MTSS process, and restorative practices is part of a trauma-informed school, and it is MTSS aligned for behavioral supports.
Yeah, for me, I think it's just that you take the time to actually teach at really every level the right of an effective way, let's say it that way, an effective way of dealing with difficult situations. If you do that, not just in your school, not just in your, building or at the elementary level, or if you do that K through 12 in your district, if you take the time to really start working on that, just like it is with curriculum, we talk about this same idea with curriculum all the time. What you will find is after a good handful of years, of course, you're playing a long game, but you are going to have middle schoolers and you're going to have high schoolers who are significantly better at dealing with conflict and dealing with tough situations than what you currently have. And it's worth it. In the long term, you are going to really make an impact on the number of behavioral situations that your district is having to deal with and work with in a reactionary way, because so many more kids and staff members are going to be capable of handling things well before things get really big. There will always be stuff that comes up. There will always be big things that come up. That's just the nature of all of it. But you're going to really reduce how things are happening within the district, and you're going to really improve ultimately the culture and climate. You're going to improve how confident and competent all of the staff members feel within your district, the more and more comfortable everybody gets with this. It's worth it. I think it's worth starting. If you're out there and you're listening to this and you're thinking, I would love my principal and superintendent to be able to hear about this.
Yeah.
Hey, share this episode.
Hey,
it'd be a good way to get the conversation going within your district or within your building or within even starting within your team in your building. I think it's worthwhile. So hopefully you found something useful. Hopefully you've learned a little bit more about restorative practices and how it can look at different tier levels. Like always, we really do hope you share it with somebody and that you keep the conversation going that way. And let's go out there and do the work.
Let's go do it.